This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insight on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Conversations.
Did you ever notice where all movement and all change goes on? It seems to occur only among the things you appear to be conscious of. Consciousness itself never moves or changes, no matter how often the body or other things appear to move. Consciousness simply is. To say you appear to be aware of movement and change is one thing, but to identify with it would be a mistake. To mistakenly identify as a body is to assume you always are moving and changing, because the body is constantly moving and changing position. A body's sense of here never is permanent, but is based on wherever the body appears to go. When the body is in the kitchen, that is here. When the body goes outdoors, outdoors becomes here. The kitchen now is over there. Identifying as awareness, not body, there is only one here, like the one movie screen. This single here is not a geographical place. It is boundless awareness, as it is being. As awareness, you never move or change. This is clear only to one identifying as pure awareness alone. As the body appears to go through each passing day, there is nothing about you that is passing. The one all-embracing stillness is what you are. You are not that which always moves and never is present, for you actually are being alive, isness, all-inclusive vitality, love as consciously alive substance. Excerpt from Consciousness is All. Valeria interviews Peter Francis Jubin, the author of Consciousness is All. Peter is an author/lecturer on spirituality and consciousness. His first book, Consciousness is All, has helped thousands of readers around the world find their true nature as the infinite self, leading to greater happiness and freedom. Peter's second book, Simply Notice, Clear Awareness is the Key to Happiness, Love, and Freedom, was written to make the deeper points of awareness and spirituality more accessible to the general public. He currently provides consultations and life coaching on a one-on-one basis or in small groups via his living room workshop teleconference calls. Here is the interview with Peter Francis Jubin.
In your own words, who is Peter Francis Jubin?
Well, Peter Francis Jubin is, frankly, a label given to a body, a person, what we call a person. And that's fine. That's wonderful. We all appear to have labels like that. And that's how society works. And, so we sort of conform to what seems to be the way of doing things in society today. But that's maybe, let's just say, a very sort of surfacey or superficial type of label or identification. And Peter Francis Jubin is a package of experiences, background from being born at a certain time, certain kind of family experiences, living experiences, certain parts of the country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, that's all just sort of a very, very, very tiny part of the whole, really. Just what you see on the surface. Like literally, like they say, it's a cliche, the tip of the iceberg, maybe.
Before we talk about some of the topics in your book, consciousness is all. Now life is completely new. I have a few warm-up questions, as I mentioned, off record. So the first warm-up question is, what is life to you?
That's a good one. Life is, in its true sense, is only experienceable, aliveable. Right now, for example, as these words are being said on the surface, it's as if there's an underlying presence that out of which the words are arising. And if we just, as you know, pause, maybe even find out what it is that's present permanently, ever present behind the words, underneath the words, and is still very present when there are no words, it's alive. And whatever I might say in words about that might be beautifully accurate, might be as I was just trying to point in what I was just saying, yet the realness of what life is what this aliveness is as itself, without any words or thoughts on top of it.
Right. What do you think is the opposite of life?
Doesn't have one in the deepest sense. Doesn't have one. It might seem to have one when we sort of mentally wander. Life and consciousness, pure awareness, being, this which, again, here, just so this is for your audience, just so this isn't words or theory or, Peter's opinion as opposed to countless others, but so it can be directly experienced by anyone listening. And it doesn't matter what date this, might appear to seem to be listened to on a playback, but this which is here, present, alive, in spite of whether thinks or says anything about it or not. It's choiceless, as they say, too. And prior to this pure consciousness as it is being, it's always present tense. It can't be other than present tense. And when one is one's attention, if you will, is wholly immersed as this, there's just this. And there is no opposite. This is the infinite. The infinity doesn't have an opposite. It's only when we leave this pure being, this pure conscious aliveness, and get into thought or sensory phenomena that we're in the finite, really, the world that we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, think about, have emotions about, which is we don't negate it, we're not against it at all. It's a beautiful sort of playground, really. But that's where the finite is, and that's where the opposites are, and that's where it seems there's life and death and all that. But in the deepest sense, there is no opposite to life.
So death is just another experience, isn't it?
I was just going to say, one of the things in my so-called experience or path or whatever we want to call it, that was the peak moment or the most significant was the perspective for me was flipped around. In other words, rather than, which I had always done and which all of us are taught to do, it seems from the beginning when we first get on the path, is there was a me, very sincere Peter, spiritual seeker, trying to sort things out and reading every book he can get his hands on and listening to audios and all this stuff. But there was Peter and then this divine, this infinite, this eternal that I was finding out about, that I was gradually sort of making my way to, or that I was dissolving in the face of. And where the lights really went on was when that perspective was kind of flipped around 180 degrees. And rather than Peter sort of working up to life with the capital L, the big life, it was a matter of, wait a minute. It's life itself that's being alive. Peter doesn't know how to do that, but here life is right here. Here it is, functioning perfectly, effortlessly. But it's life that's doing that. I don't know how to personally make life be alive. And by the way, it's this life, it's already at itself. It can't get closer to the life it already is being. And so who is there to be seeking it? That's all delusion. In the illusion of being a separate self. And then so much of that unnecessary effort just kind of, dissolves. And there's this aha. And that's life's aha, not Peter's, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm wondering, how did this happen? Did that take experiences to get there?
It seems like there was a lot along the way. Again, like we've all done, I was reading everything I could get my hands on, and one thing led to another. In the way my experience appeared to unfold, I wasn't led too much to the Eastern teachings in the books, like Advaita Vedanta and other Hindu and Buddhism and all that. I liked the way they sort of went about. I used to go to meditation sessions when I was living in New York City at the time, actually. And I used to go to some there, and I was raised Roman Catholic. And so it was just such a totally different atmosphere. And the peace was so delicious experientially. And I went on from one thing to another, let's say in my working with the letter of truth, or learning it, knowing the truth kind of. And one of the higher teachings I found was the Infinite Way, which probably many of your listeners are already familiar with, founded by Joel Goldsmith. And I thought that was it. And for many years it was. And yet somewhere in there, a friend told me about the work of a man named Alfred Aiken, Aiken, who wrote books on absolute reality. And something which was not Peter, but which is this infinite intelligence that is the one being presently conscious right now, right here. It took me a while to sort of wake up to, hey, you better check this out. So sure enough, I found, through a friend, I found his books. And the first book I read it's titled That Which Is. And in the first chapter, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but it said, life is a matter of looking out from God rather than starting as an assumed separate self and looking up to God. And it was like right there, aha, that's what I've been doing. And that didn't mean that things all of a sudden stopped, but there continues, and it'll go on infinitely, because consciousness is infinite. There will continue to be infinite unfoldment. It'll appear to work that way, but there's no longer that same striving and struggling and trying to get there. And the whole time it's an imaginary self, false self that's trying to do all that.
Right. What is the meaning of freedom to you, Pete?
Yeah, that's fine. Either one. It's, again, it's not knowing anything necessarily sort of intellectually or being able to reduce it to words, but just the fact of this aliveness that's here. It's absolutely, all it knows is right now. And it's absolutely, without getting into thought about it, but just this pure, raw aliveness, it has absolutely no baggage. It's endless openness. Lively experienced, not thought about, even though we can think about it and we enjoy doing that too. But the actual juice or stuff is the silent aliving, and it's spontaneous. It's fresh. So that, and that being enough, not leading somewhere, not trying to accomplish anything, but just this now.
A question that came to mind is, would that realization end all kinds of suffering?
Yes, because it doesn't belittle suffering, it doesn't look down on suffering as like, oh, that's for the unenlightened. No, not that at all. It's just the aliveness and the totality of the presence of the aliveness, which is all there is, really, is that it blots everything out. Suffering can't happen because the fullness of aliveness is so utter, so complete. And it's all that's going on. And so there's nothing else can enter or happen, really, unless we sort of mentally wander away from this, and because we still seem to have body minds and need to use them, on a day-to-day basis, that's kind of quote unquote the work, is to stay alert to this freedom that's really actually always here and available.
Right. So in a way, it expands the space within where it's able to embrace everything and experience everything without judgment, without separation.
Yes. Yeah.
Going back to the relative reality, which is it too. At this time, what is the world's greatest need, in your opinion? And do you have a vision for a new reality?
It would be, first, that it's really not the only one to have a vision is the self, capital S, the one, or the divine, infinite consciousness, all these words we can use. And it's the now, the same thing, the I am presence, all of those are just labels. But here, this something is being infallibly, presently alive, always. And it's just, from a human point of view, from the relative point of view, we can say it seems like everyone needs to awaken to this. And it appears that way from the human perspective, the everyday relative perspective. But from the divine perspective, which actually is the correct one, and we say that because it's this consciousness, divinity, whatever term, that's the one being conscious, not Peter, not people, really. It seems that way. But so you have to to be consistent, one has to sort of start there. And it doesn't need to wake up. It doesn't need to, it's wholly awake, it's perfect, it's pure. And it's an interesting little aside that comes up as you say this, but just to make it keep from sounding like something, oh, well, that's nice in the spiritual world, but it's so abstract. It really isn't abstract. It's very practical. It's the most practical thing we can do, because when one is sort of letting this perspective of the divine be one's operative perspective of this already there-ness, this ever freshness, spontaneity, freedom, non-judgmental, non-suffering, just fresh now, that this same consciousness is what is perceiving the entirety of your world and universe and experience. It's the only perceiver. And when one is coming from here, it's as if divine perception is perceiving my universe now, instead of little worried Peter self worrying about this and that and throwing up all these thoughts and emotions and filters in the way, sort of messing up the view. But when that's gone, this divinity then seems to perceive my universe, and even while I still appear to have a body and be walking around in the world. And so what better thing could we do for our whole world? And again, another thing about this is it cannot operate only personally. It has to the universal has to function universally. It can't operate just for one person. So and that's, recognized and seen, oh yes, this embraces the entire universe. This is not just for Peter, but everything that appears within the scope of this consciousness, and it's infinite, is sort of quote unquote blessed by this perception.
I'm wondering about imagination. Do you still imagine?
Well, what happens is there's a clarity, and it's not Peter's clarity, it's this infinite sort of self-awareness that it's absolutely unlimited. And staying alive only presently and not letting Peter thoughts of a past come in, there's nothing wrong with them, by any means, or a future wondering, speculating. That's all fine. But the minute there's that thought of something, right there's some type of limitation. It's not a bad thing, but now there's this ever-present infinite sort of in the background, and now this finite thought has come up of something, and if a lot of attention is given to that, as they say, where attention goes, energy flows, I sort of limited things to that, and that's okay. But the awareness that, wait a minute, this infinite, if I just stay sort of still and alive, presently alive as this, and rest in this, and let it do the imagining, so to speak. I mean, after all, it's infinite intelligence that knows how to appear to create an entire stellar universe, and the beauties of art and music and even things like mathematics and all this stuff that just happens without man. Man doesn't invent it. Man sort of uncovers what's already always been present. And that appears as, all kinds of incredible new realizations and insights, or, on another way we could say it is imagination. So.
Yeah, I like that. Do you think that sometimes, or maybe all the time, the universe, the divine force, uses emotions to guide us?
Yes, sure. It's going to be different for each one of us, seems to be, and it's because it's always, it's infinite, it's in its potential expression. But yeah, sometimes there might be a little nudge of, dissatisfaction, or what has been coming up for me a lot lately in the last year or two is maybe not so much an emotion, but maybe this is an emotion, and a feeling of like staleness, or sort of dullness or stuckness. And that now I've learned, that's a wake-up call. Time to let something go. Time to let something else go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, but it might be even a little bit stronger emotion, like dissatisfaction or whatever. And that's life trying to break through those, seeming things we still seem to hold on to, maybe, as they say, subconsciously, without being aware of it. And it's bringing them up to say, okay, let go of this now. You can let go of this now.
And that's another interesting topic, attachment, right? How can we attach, but at the same time let go?
Yeah.
What is love to you, Peter?
If I were to put it in words, it's a feeling, but much deeper than an emotion of attraction for another person. That is and can be a very wonderful, wonderful thing. And it is. But there's a deeper, just again, ever-present oneness, which is simultaneously a warmth, it's a softness, it's a tenderness, it's an intimacy, a caring, and knowing that even what might appear to be all these other apparent bodies in the world that appear as if they're separate, the divine I, the one divine I that is alive right there as what you call you being alive, there's really no distance or separation between itself. That's where we get fooled by the senses. But it's just an intimacy of oneness. It's like, how close is the present to itself? And you can't answer that with you blow a fuse in your mind, but we can experience it. That is a felt thing. And again, it's a gentle something. It's alive, but it's so gentle and never looking to another for something, never wanting something never needing anything. It's a satisfiedness too. It's a sense of completeness and fullness, or as you say, well-being too.
Yeah, it's very subtle. You're right.
Yeah.
What is your understanding and idea of peace?
Basically the same thing. we have all these synonyms.
Yeah.
And there's really, what it comes down to, sort of from the divine perspective, they're just one stuff. But we can use all these words, and they helps us in the everyday world to talk about it and have wonderful conversations like this. But it's a satisfiedness, and sometimes with some of the people that I work with, and for myself, so to speak, I have to say it that way, place a lot of emphasis on so it's more of an experience rather than something that's being talked about even right now. There's this presence feeling, presence awareness. Here it is. It's absolutely effortless. It's just a feeling, really a very simple feeling, subtle, like you said. And yet, but it's not a power that does anything, because itself is all. It's like Joel Goldsmith used to call it it's the power that is non-power, because it's just itself. It can't be used by anybody because there is nobody else. There's just itself being. And if you take away in experience the illusory sort of aspects of experiences, which is what is visibly seen and what is heard by the ear and what is felt by the tactile sense and what is tasted and smelled, all you're left with is this gentle feeling. And to it does not have to spread out across a whole world and planet, because that's the illusion. It's not really there in the way it appears. It certainly appears to be there, but that's the illusion. And so peace is satisfied to be itself alone. It's not trying to pacify anything. Peace is all. So it has nothing besides itself it needs to pacify. So there's a true resting right here in this, as this satisfiedness. And this literally is all that exists, really.
Yes, 1,000 times.
And you are that. That is you, which is peace sort of right now, which is being experienced here. It's as if peace is talking to itself throughout this whole conversation. It's right there where the Valeria body appears to be, where the Peter body appears to be, where all the subsequent audience listener bodies appear to be, is really this one piece saying, yeah, this is me. This is it.
Do you ever use the word God?
Yes, sometimes. It's useful. It has a lot of baggage, too, from what culture seems to have done to it. But sometimes it's helpful in the sense of it completely sort of forces one to drop a lot of personal stuff that might be unwittingly being clung to still, or, just because you can say, well, wait a minute, none of this kind of stuff is going on in God. And if we sort of start from the God end rather than from this personal, separate human, mortal self looking up to God, but don't start at that end, but start from the divine perspective and sort of let it be a matter of looking out from there. And again, why? Because that's what life, God, the self, the one, consciousness with the capital C is doing. And this is its consciousness, not mine. So that's got to be the sort of the actual perspective, so to speak. And yeah, it doesn't really think of itself as God, but it is a helpful term sometimes.
It's almost like starting with the end.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting. The start is the destination at the same time.
Exactly.
What we see a lot is that when they do that, they create this idea of God outside of themselves, above themselves, and then they look down, not just at...
Right. Oh, yes. It does. Once you leave infinite intelligence, anything's possible. It seems to be.
Yeah, that's true.
In a dream, anything can go on, as they
No
say.
doubt about that. So, and speaking of dreams, do you see a difference between spirituality and religion?
Yes. At least in how, I have to say it this way, because we're talking here, in how I define spirituality. Boy, is that another word that really has a lot of different definitions, depending on, because frankly, most folks who, and because I felt this way too, is that, when I attend formal religious services or that are dealing with a me down here and a God off there somewhere, and maybe on a throne, and a God of punishment and reward and all that stuff. It's a lot of dogma and knowing about and belief, really, and actual spirituality. No one really, the only one that can experience true spirituality is spirit itself. For that to happen, Peter just has to shut up and be silent and be still.
I'm almost at the end of the warm-up questions. It's very interesting the way you express it. It's fun.
Yeah, and again, may I say something right there?
Yeah.
But just because it popped up as you were saying that, for the audience who is listening to this, it sounds, according to the picture presented by our five senses, it sure looks like there's a Valeria in New York talking to a Peter body in Arizona. And yet, the way to hear, and it seems as if these words are coming through a Peter body. And actually, if you're going to do anything, that's the way to think of it, is that they only are coming through Peter body, the way the music comes through the radio, but there's no band inside the radio playing that music. The radio didn't compose the music. It's just a vehicle. And it's the same thing for what's being said right now about spirit and all these other, peace and love. It is that divinity itself that is ever present, that's really the one talking, doing the talking here. Thanks to which this can be put into words, put it that way. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. Continue. But that's the way to hear this, rather than, oh, this Peter boy, he's been on the spiritual path a long time. He knows a lot. It's got nothing to do with him. Don't attach any of it to Peter, because you're only limiting yourself if you do that. You're robbing yourself, really. Anyway.
What do you think is the purpose of life in the human body? What is the whole purpose of this?
Again, we're that's what we're talking about. So we sort of have to speak on those terms, from that perspective. And if anything, it would be to awaken in this lifetime and awaken now before the body leaves the scene. But as they say, even in the Bible, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And there's so many other sayings too. But they're saying heaven is here now. It's just a matter of, where are you coming from? Are you letting heaven be the very consciousness you are? Are you letting that in? Are you letting, the very life? It's heavenly. That peace we're talking about, that is heaven. Anything else is like something that human imagination is imagining a heaven to be. But it's right here. And it's so to realize that now, sure, even one can experience it, even while one still appears to have a body and walks around on the planet and, does things and all that.
Yeah. What do you think happens if we don't realize this truth, what life really is?
Yeah. Valeria, I would be honest too. I would be speculating on that, because I have had some deep experiences, and I even way back I did some self-hypnosis as far as, maybe what were previous lives and karmic experience and all that stuff. But it's hard to say for certain that one is going to reincarnate, because I don't have that actual vivid experience. That's not been the way things have unfolded for me. So I can't say, but I would expect that is what happens. If you don't make it this time around, you're just going to recycle and do it again until you do. And I've heard some teachers that I've had along the way, whom I respect very much, and I know they had some very sort of deep experiences in that territory. So I would tend to go with that.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I really appreciate your honesty and expressing what you know from experience. You're just talking from that place. Thank you so much for that. So let's talk about your work. What was the inspiration and the intention of writing your book, Consciousness is All?
I had found Alfred Aiken's work, which consisted of about, 9, 10 books, maybe a couple more, all of them. And it was so clean, the work, in terms of the consistency of constantly coming from the divine. And you see, it's actually misleading for me to say a man named Alfred Aiken wrote those books. Not really. It was the first book written, so we say, by him, That Which Is, the title of it, was written not by a man, but by a state of consciousness. That's really what's doing everything around here anyway. And it was a state of consciousness that was aware it is the I am, or that which is. And so I started, I read the books, and then the people the company, whatever, that's still, he had passed on. I never knew him personally. But the company that sort of keeps his work before the public used to hold seminars several times a year, and there were like week-long meetings, and they would play these audio recordings of seminars that Aiken gave, like for a full 7 days. And boy, was that a deep dive, as they say. And after doing that for a couple of years, just because, as far as I was concerned, there's nothing else more important than this idea started dinging. These books were written in the 1950s and early 1960s, and this was back in speaking in terms of time, in the maybe early 1990s when I had come across it. And the books use a lot of biblical references, because his particular background and expression was Christian. And so there's a lot of that in there. And this thought kept dinging, this could be said in a very different way, the same thing, but just expressed differently by using the word consciousness instead of God, as you touched on earlier. And just, sort of going at it from that angle. And the idea wouldn't leave me alone. And eventually it sort of started to build up into, well, you could say this too, and oh, you could say that too, and this could be said. And then I started taking notes, and I thought, okay, yeah, this is going to be, it's consciousness that's being conscious. You got to look out from the divine. Consciousness is always infallibly present tense. It never deviates. It doesn't know of a past or future. Consciousness is all inclusive. There's nothing outside of it. There's like these major points about it. And it's like, yeah, sure, I can bang this out. I'll be done in 6 months tops. And it ended up taking more like 5 years to get it all said. But it was one of those things where very strong feeling, you got to do this, because if you don't get this, let it express itself, you're going to regret it the rest of your life. And so I just got out of the way and let it, kind of go.
Did you experience any change or transformation within?
Yes, very much. That was a fantastic so-called experience for me, to just get immersed in that. And I was just, as towards the end of the writing of it, and when it was starting to come together, it was like I barely remember what went on during the day when I was working on the book, but it was just a total immersion in it. And, things clarified. We'll put it this way. It wasn't that a Peter took on all this wonderful wisdom. No, wisdom with the capital W is, and Peter dissolved to some extent anyway. A lot of Peter as a personality evaporated, seemed to sort of have never been anything in the first place.
Wow. What an amazing journey, experience this is, isn't it?
Yeah.
In your book, you say something very interesting. You say, we cannot have a memory of the present. So I guess my question is, what are thoughts and what are memories?
Thoughts are a type of, I'll say, finite phenomena. It's not something physical, like, right now, the body that's listening to this and this one that's doing the talking, or those, your audience members. It's not something like a chair that is being sat on while the listening is happening or the talking is happening. It's more, as they say, subtle than that. There's gross thoughts. Actually, when you look at the physical world and you see from another point of view, it's actually all mental or mentation or perception. We can sometimes call those gross thoughts. And if I think in my so-called mind of a pink rose right now, that's what would be called a subtle thought. Or if I see the letter A in my thought, that might be called a subtle thought. So there are those, and there's interesting, but it's still some sort of phenomena. There's a mental object. It's a mental object, not a physical object. Like letter A is maybe the thing that goes up on an angle from the left-hand side is in bright blue. The one that goes down on the right-hand side to make the peak that's orange, and the crossbar in between is flashing white, back and forth, blinking on. Now you can see that, but those are like mental constructs or objects, really, even though there's no solidity to them. And it's interesting, when we are unaware of self, pure awareness, presence, and are sort of driven by the senses of what is visible, touchable, hearable, etc., that sort of engenders or encourages one type of thought based on the level of the senses. And when we're awakened to some extent and the mind becomes more quiet, other thoughts will arise, but they will arise out of the stillness. And those are more of the nature of divinity. That's when we have the insights and the realizations and the ahas and all that. And yet that they're still not it itself, because it's sort of been reduced still to something finite and knowable. And what you are is absolutely unknowable, unreducible to something known. So that's just an interesting thing about thoughts, is sort of where they're coming from. They can come from seemingly two different places. And then memory is an interesting thing about memory when you really look at it. But memory is, we'll say in everyday language, it's a thought of something that happened before, a seeming prior time. And it's a trick that the mind plays, actually, that there can even be such a thing as what we call memory. But that's what it is. And yet, like the passage you were reading there, in the present, there's just presentness. There's no thought here. And so how can there be a memory of now? Because it's not something that was, it is. Memory purportedly is something that the mind tries to tell you, suggests to you that something that was. That's the suggestion.
I'm wondering if without the memory, what would this be like?
Oh, yeah. It would be, in one way, it would be hard to function in our present day society, for sure. It seems that way. And yet, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could sort of just selectively delete all those memories that don't serve us? You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, wow. That would have been amazing.
And the package of emotions and feelings and that goes with so much of it too.
That's true, but it makes sense the way you're saying. So the present, the divine, what is, it's not a memory, cannot be captured. encapsulated in the memory and thought. So that's why when people say, oh, you need to remember who you are, and that's so abstract, and we're like, oh, is that a memory? So how do I remember? And then they go back to past lives and all that stuff.
Yes, you're right. It implies, no, I hesitate to get into this because it's not something that can necessarily be clear in just a couple of minutes. But go ahead. Let's see where else we go here with this. Maybe we can get into this in a bit, depending on where we go.
Yeah.
What else? What else did you have next?
Something, you also wrote something about the body. You said the body is not being. We are being, not human beings.
Yes.
I don't have a question. I didn't think about a question, but what is not being? Everything is being. Everything is it. There's nothing that's not.
Well, it depends, again, on sort of which direction we speak from. If starting from the divine, which is, let's say, all the presence there is, all presence, we could say omnipresent, and that tends to get one thinking spatially, which really isn't accurate because that's a sensory thing and that can be misleading. But let's just say you got to have consciousness first. There's got to be, that's primary. Without consciousness, there's nothing. There'd be nothing to be conscious of, sensations or thoughts or anything. And so you got consciousness being sort of total presence first. And it is just present right now, just so this isn't like some guy's theory for your audience. See, don't take my words for it, but see if this, which is presently conscious as these words are being listened to, can this consciousness itself vacate being present?
I don't think so. That's not possible.
No, it doesn't budge. No, it won't budge. Thinking will flit back and forth and maybe think of, the past, what it calls the past or the future. Thinking will jump around, but awareness is like rock solid. It's because it's total presence. It can't go anywhere because it's already everywhere. And it is just, it just is. It's just being. And that's infinite being. And it's the mind cannot get this. You got to be being awareness for it to sort of, be clear or make sense. And one thing, again, it's sometimes the definition of words. This was what Alfred Aiken was excellent for. He was such a stickler for accuracy of, what do you mean by saying that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? So you really get within yourself, and you got to be really clear within yourself what you're talking about, by definitions. And actually being, for example, in the everyday world, there's a lot of haziness about the word being, and people think it sort of is co-present with passing time. And all the everyday world, which is, everyone will, I think, agree that the everyday world that we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, it's all energy. And energy, by definition, is vibration, right? I think everyone will agree with that. And vibration, why is it called vibration? It's because maybe we can't think it this fine, and scientists can get down really fine and measure it, but it's sort of oscillating or vibrating with a certain frequency, depending on whatever it is that you're talking about, down to atomic particles and subatomic particles, which basically make up what we call the body, really. That's it. That's at the essence of it. It's all energy, really. And the whole, manifest phenomenal world. It appears to be energy. And thanks to this vibration, it's always constantly changing. And all of this energy is happening. We see, for example, a wall is different from H2O or air because one seems more solid than the other. And that's a little different from water, which is liquid, because they're vibrating at different frequencies. That's all. And our level of perception of that is another kind of frequency, and that's how the whole thing interacts. But when you look at being, And what it really means, being means is, present tense. And in is, there's absolutely no mention of time.
Yeah.
No mention of past or future. And time is, past is not anymore, and future is not yet. But in pure is, there's just is. There isn't any is not anymore or is not yet. There's just is. And in being, what I'm saying is, in pure being, infinite being is not frequent. Being is. So there's no frequency in being. It is. And so it is not in the deepest sense, it is not in the realm of vibration. It's outside of it. It's independent of it.
Oh, wow.
And you see, because all vibration too is finite. It's measurable. Even though, it takes these super fine scientific instruments to do it. And a lot of times they're just theorizing. But by the very fact that you're saying, well, this one is at this frequency and this one is at that frequency, you've got some kind of measurement going on there, an observation to be able to tell one from the other. And in being, there's none of that. And again, the thinking mind just can't go there, because the thinking mind itself is time and is vibration. And that's why this is totally outside of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, when you say outside of that, in your book, you write something that I wrote here. There is no world out there separate from you. That this being or this whatever we can put into words even, it can only experience itself through all this, being you, me, nature.
Right. And yeah. We it sounds funny, Valeria, but we are able to say these things and be clear about them. But I'm not going to kid myself. I am so far away from living that. If I were living as pure being, there'd be no phenomena. I would be incapable of talking. I would not be experiencing time. There'd just be light. That's all. It's interesting too, from the human and scientific point of view, scientists will look at the phenomenal world of energy and all this vibration, and they'll get it down and they'll say, well, it's all photons. I've heard that said. I don't know how accurate that is. I don't know, but it seems like it. And photons are light, units of light. And from our sort of finite perspective, when we're sort of looking in on light, that's how we can describe it. And we see, oh yes, these photons, it's almost like we've got 1 foot in each area a little bit. But from the standpoint, if you flip the perspective around again, in absolute light, which we could say is synonymous with pure being, there's just light. There's no change. And it does not think of itself as made up of many separate photons. That's something the human mind does its best to try and describe, but it just is being changeless light. And it has nothing objective to itself, even.
Right. And that's the paradox, which is fascinating, so wonderful. There's that consciousness is everything, and at the same time, it's not. So is and isn't at the same time. Same. There's no time anyway. So everything now, here, you, me, everything that's happening, it's just it. It's the absolute experiencing the relative. And yeah, it's amazing. You're right. The rational mind cannot comprehend, cannot even get started with that.
No. And it's good to know that too, so then you won't waste time trying.
Right.
Wow. But it's interesting how by just resting as that stillness and letting the infinite be present instead of me, Peter, trying to be infinity, just getting out of the way, so to speak, or just resting is all you can do. Then these insights and realizations come too. And by the way, just to make this again, so it doesn't sound so out there or abstract, and why it's so practical is like, I would expect a lot of your audience are people that deal in energy and maybe energy workers and all that. And this is just sort of maybe a validation that you as you truly are not on the level of that with which you are working. And that's why, we can all tell, sort of, we do it intuitively or by feel, we can tell the difference between dense energy and, agitative energy and peace and ease and calm and soft energy and all that. That's thanks to you're not being any one of those. Because if you were on that level, you couldn't stand apart from it and say, aha, this one is that way and that other is that way. And I can make that distinction as awareness from the standpoint of awareness or pure being. And that's your sort of your freedom and if sometimes they say your dominion.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's when most of us get stuck when we think that it has this, it has a quality when this is it's bathed, or the perfume of consciousness is all over it somehow. It has taken over somehow. At the same time, it's not. But when some people don't know how to navigate, how to open that door to pure consciousness, as you call it, we feel the suffering. That's my measurement in a way. And anxiety, depression, all that. And that's when I know. But would you like to add anything before I ask you my final questions, Peter?
Nothing's coming up other than just if this were of any use, interest, help to anyone listening, is just stay open to your keep your as they say, keep your attention within and stay open to the inherent goodness that is being you and that is always available and speaking in its own language, though, and be receptive, be listening, but have the attention within rather than on the external, because the external is by the time it's manifest, it's already old news, and there's no power there, there's no life there. It's all that which is being alive as you is all the life. And we, for want of a better way of saying, we call that the within, but that's where it's at.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for the profound message. So my final questions, what is to be successful in this relative reality? What would that look like?
Well, it's interesting. I'll start by, again, and this is not Peter. This is just how the self is and talks about itself. But it's that, let's look at that question first from the divine perspective, and it's so simple, because all there is to the self-consciousness, after all this talk and all this deep-seeming stuff, it is as simple as being present now. How simple? Nothing could be simpler. It doesn't involve any thought. It doesn't take any time. It's like, here it is, boom, being is. And from the divine point of view, from the standpoint of consciousness, isn't consciousness even right now being 100% successful in being presently conscious?
Yeah.
Isn't it succeeding at being? Isn't being succeeding at being right now? Yeah. If it weren't being, I wouldn't be. I wouldn't be able to talk. I wouldn't exist. There'd be no existence. But here's existence. Here's consciousness. In other words, the self, from its perspective, is always 100% absolute success, being itself. And that being itself is the only I that there is, which means it's the only kind of you there is. That which can say I right where you are is that self. So always absolute success is 100% guaranteed. I have a saying I like: divine perfection is always the only outcome. From the divine point of view. And if you take that might seem like, again, as talking about the divine, what about my everyday world? But if you let that be your attitude, then that consciousness is what precedes your everyday world. And your everyday world and this consciousness is the substance of that everyday world. So it has to begin to reflect that perspective. And so from in the everyday world, as you get to your question now, finally, long way around, from the relative sort of point of view, success is letting the perspective of the divine be the perspective that's going to be taken right here. That is just always infallibly present, pure, perfect. It also it's not so in the clouds that it doesn't know how to deal with things on an everyday basis. And if you see someone that appears to be suffering, inwardly know their truth of their divine nature, and outwardly maybe offer kind words, or can I help? What can I do to help you? And so on and so on and so on. Outwardly with the body in the everyday world, bring it down to earth, so to speak, and be helpful in whatever way you can outwardly, but inwardly maintain your integrity, which is absolute perfect integrity. The self is perfect integrity, and that's your only nature. Not thanks to you, not thanks to Valeria or Peter or any other body, thanks to self being what it is.
Yeah. Wow, your definition of success reminded me of nature itself. Yeah. It's just effortlessly unfolding. And very successful at it. Beautiful.
And very successful. That's right.
What was the hardest lesson to learn about yourself navigating the relative reality?
The relative reality.
Yeah, let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it seems hard sometimes to honor what you know to be your highest sense, even though conditioning and the senses and old thoughts and more like what they call subconscious feelings want to pull you into old habits or another, kind of direction that on the highest level, isn't your highest, but something seems like you can't help yourself, and you just go along with it. And then afterward, you hate yourself for doing it. And then you learn I didn't invent any of this stuff personally anyway. And I'm, so I'm just going to be forgiving of myself and just pick up and start all over again.
It just led to my next question. Do you believe in unconditional self-love?
Yes, from the divine point of view. From a personal point of view, there's so many, who knows, dark closets, and if you want to say from prior lives, who knows what went on in previous experiences, and karmic stuff is still hanging around. But from the higher point of view, we can say, the self is unconditional love, and it doesn't love itself as if it were an object to itself, because it is itself. It can't be an object to itself, but its very nature is unconditional love, and that is the one who is being present and alive here as no thanks to Peter, thanks to self being what it is. And so, yes, that self can wholeheartedly accept what it is as itself right here, as this self that's being conscious here. And it definitely feels worthy. Does Peter feel worthy of being divine? No way. But is not the self worthy of being all that is true of itself? Of course. Of course. In fact, it can't be otherwise. It already is that. Why throw up resistance in the way of that? And so, that inner me that still, I don't deserve this or whatever. No, get out of the way. Just go. Let go. Because this isn't Peter's life in the first place anyway, really.
I find it interesting the way you say that Peter is not deserving to be divine, or that's kind of interesting the way you say, right? I don't separate the relative and the absolute. It's one thing. I don't see the difference.
On a personal basis, yeah. But it would be like when thoughts of Peter's past experience and behaviors as a kid or whatever come in, and they try to throw up this thing and says, "Whoa, you're not worthy. You're unworthy. You're the all this stuff," and then there's like, no. That's just a mirage, really. That's a smoke screen, really. Not really there. And it is, as you say.
Yeah, there's no separation.
No.
If you knew you would lose the body, leave the body soon, would you change anything about your life or do anything differently?
I would say just in one sense, I could say try to be more true to myself. And then in another sense, I can say, look, I didn't set out to make things hard for myself, intentionally. And so even when it seemed like I was messing up, I was still doing the best I knew at that level of consciousness. So, I might say, there were times when I felt if I could have been maybe a little more honest inwardly, a little more, true to myself, the self, put it that way.
Would you do anything differently now if you knew you would lose the body in, let's say, a week from today's date?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, if I really knew that, I'd maybe call up close friends and say goodbye, maybe, or something. But
I love that answer. Not changing anything, right? My last question, what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of this moment?
The only self there is perfect, pure divinity. That's number 1. It is infallibly ever present, can't go away, and it's pure love.
Thank you so much for your wisdom, your genuine presence. It has been fun to listen to you.
Yeah. Oh, you too, Valeria. It's been just delightful sharing like this and being able to at this level. It's, You know what I mean? It's just totally a delight to be able to talk. Talking to myself, that's what it feels like. Just one here is talking to itself.
Yeah, right. It's fun.
Yeah.
And it is fun, isn't it? That might be the whole plan. And just to have fun.
Yes.
This kind of fun.
Yes.
Where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
On the website, which is https:// and then my name, Peter, Peter. Last name is tricky, DZIUB, like boy, AN as in now.com. PeterJubin.com.
Wonderful.
And there's audios and books there and free writings and a lot of material. My website is sort of a little bit under construction right now. I'm starting to revamp it and change it up because it just needs some freshening up. So,
thank you so much, Peter, and we'll talk soon.
You too, Valeria. I really, really appreciate it. It's just been delightful, and thanks to your audience too for when they'll be listening.
Wonderful. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Peter Francis Jubin, please visit his website, peterjubin.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. I want to thank the Patreon members, Lawrence McGrath, Mark Basden, Terry Clayton, and Aidan Vickrock. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.